Meanwhile, upon returning from their recess, the House Democratic Caucus met tonight. We were just telling you this about their next steps in the unfolding impeachment inquiry. And I am now joined by Congressman Eric Swalwell from California. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, and Elise Jordan, a former Bush administration aide in the White House and the State Department. Thanks to all of you for joining with us. Congressman, let me just start with you because we began this hour with that press conference. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, the chairman of your committee, Adam Schiff, looking into these the questions here involving Ukraine. There was some reporting and some speculation this afternoon that this press conference might be called to announce that Democrats had decided to hold a vote on the House floor to formally open an impeachment inquiry. Nancy Pelosi had said at that press conference a few weeks ago, Democrats were now engaged in an impeachment inquiry. Republicans, the White House certainly have been saying there needs to be, in their view, an official vote on the House floor for that. I take it based on what we were not hearing in those first 10 or so minutes, that is not the plan. There is not going to be, at least for now, a vote to authorize an inquiry. Is that correct?
Good evening, Steve. We believe we are in a formal impeachment inquiry, and in the history of investigations, no investigator has ever allowed a suspect to dictate the terms and direction and timeline of an investigation. We're not going to let Donald Trump do that. So we're going to continue to proceed. In the last 3 weeks, we've heard from a number of witnesses. The timeline is becoming clearer, and the who was in the shadow scheme loop and who was outside the loop is also coming more into focus.
Just the reporting from Politico, though, just on this, the idea of having a vote to open an inquiry is that House Democratic leadership, particularly James Clyburn's office, was reaching out to you and your Democratic colleagues about this, the possibility in this reporting here that Democrats would reassess this in the future. Is it possible there still might be a vote?
I don't want to speak for the Speaker. I can just tell you that we are doing an impeachment investigation, hearing from witnesses, subpoenaing documents. We have the crime of extortion, bribery, soliciting campaign help from a foreign government. You have a confession from the president, and you have a cover-up. But we have 2 feet in 3 lanes, essentially. We are legislating on prescription drugs and health care and guns. We're investigating on this inquiry, and we're going to the courts on a number of issues of lawlessness that this administration is engaged in.
Let's get into some of these hearings then, and some that has come to light from it. Peter Baker, you had that reporting last night about this testimony behind closed doors, this testimony from Fiona Hill yesterday, and your reporting brings directly into the mix the name John Bolton. Explain that connection.
Right. Of course, John Bolton had served as the National Security Advisor until last month. He left in a rift with President Trump over a number of issues, including Afghanistan, Russia, North Korea, Iran. But we learned from Fiona Hill's testimony that he was quite agitated about Rudy Giuliani's outside the system pressure campaign on Ukraine, that Giuliani was not a government official, and yet he was meeting with Ukrainian officials and playing a role in the discussion about whether or not the president of the United States would meet with the president of Ukraine, what conditions there might be, whether or not Ukraine would conduct investigations that would be politically beneficial to the president. And John Bolton had this meeting on July the 10th, along with a couple of Ukrainian officials who were visiting, Gordon Sondland, the ambassador to the EU, and they discussed this, and he was clearly consternated. He told Fiona Hill to go follow the group when they went down to the wardroom of the White House to continue the discussion. And when she came back up and related what was going on, he told her to go to the White House lawyer to report it, because he wasn't going to be part of any drug deal, metaphorically, that Gordon Sondland and Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff, were involved with.
Given this, Congressman, just that John Bolton's name now has come in so prominently, is he somebody your committee plans to call? Would you like to hear from him?
Well, I'll leave that to the chairman, but if he was the National Security Advisor when all of this went down, we're going to try and, to have a fair process, hear from relevant witnesses, not drag this out too much. When you have a suspect who's confessed to the act, you don't have to call in 1,000 witnesses. So we're going to try and, really give the president a fair process, but not, go endlessly on this. And if they're not going to cooperate, we'll put that in a bucket of obstruction of Congress as an article of impeachment to consider.
Again, we mentioned today your committee heard from George Kent, Deputy Secretary of State for Ukraine Policy. I want to read this to you. This is CNN. Your colleague, I should say, Jerry Connolly, has just told CNN that George Kent, testifying before this committee today, told lawmakers that he was told by a supervisor to lay low after he raised complaints about Rudy Giuliani's efforts in Ukraine, undermining U.S. foreign policy. Is that what you heard?
Well, I'm not going to characterize testimony until we are done, but what I will say is nothing has contradicted what the underlying act is, what the president has confessed to, and the fact that there is an active cover-up right now as we speak by the administration to prevent us from understanding what the shakedown scheme exactly is.